If there is no difference between devils and gods, does this mean that every devil fruit user has the potential to become a god? I would like to think so, as would Dr. Vegapunk, who posed this very idea as multiple branching paths forward for human evolution. In the grand scheme of things, Luffy's devil fruit may not be particularly unique. It's just been pushed into ascendance by its previous and current users, and perhaps even someone like Kaku has the potential to evolve his devil fruit to become a giraffe god, or even Treble to become some sort of mucus god. Every devil fruit can be awakened at the very least, which tends to take the abilities of the user closer and closer to that of a god, or depending on your perspective, perhaps plunge them deeper and deeper into the power of a devil, although that doesn't really matter if they're indistinguishable, which may tell us why Shanks and the Red Hair Pirates are a crew of purely non-devil fruit users. Shanks' heritage as a world noble has probably turned him off the idea of pursuing these godlike qualities, and if that's what devil fruits can do to you, then mates, we've got to stay away from all of that. And simultaneously, this might be why Blackbeard is stacking his crew with nothing but fruit users, because he is going after that pure godhood via Imu's definition, and so he is looking to become as much of a devil as he possibly can. Emu screaming really reminds you that you're reading One Piece. So this is referring to that one panel of Emu with the real long mouth. And this got a much larger reaction online than I thought it would have. A negative reaction. I guess it is a bit weird to see a character like Emu with one of those classically cool final antagonist designs making a face like this. But I don't know, it's pretty Oda standard at this point. In fact, the first thing that I thought of was the climax of Luffy vs. Katakuri, where Katakuri makes a very similar face, which I personally think was quite commanding and dramatic. Although part of that may be because Katakuri had spent almost his entire life hiding his mouth to maintain the illusion of perfection, and so there was something quite nice about Katakuri proudly making such a weird face and displaying that mouth. You could maybe say the same for Emu. He's been hiding in the shadows, maintaining this cold and emotionless facade, and now he's just cracked it, getting triggered by a memory from 800 years ago. I mean, just imagine being Loki and seeing this. All of a sudden, this dude, he's unhinging his jaw and he's starting to yell incoherently about some non-existent person. It's not as if Loki knows anything about Joy Boy. This is just weird, which is why Loki just goes and smacks him. But I do think that if you're quite put off by Emu making this face, and I'm not entirely sure how you've managed to make it almost 1,200 chapters into the series. Characters do this so often. Internet man! This chapter makes all the more sense as to why Zunesha is cursed to roam the earth. For Emu could not bring himself to destroy an old friend, even if said friend betrayed him. You know, that could be it. Let's say that Emu is correct, or at the very least Emu believes that Mu is correct, and Joy Boy did something to hit that formula of corruption, covenant, and power. In that case, Zunesha and indeed Joy Boy's entire crew also may have followed that, and perhaps Zunesha did actually commit the crime that he is accused of. And being sentenced to walk the planet was Emu's way of showing some form of mercy to his old elephantine friend. There is a theme of Joy Boy and Joy Boy associates having failed, and then going on to apologize for their personal failures. Joy Boy himself wrote the apology poneglyph to the ancient mermaid princess. Zunesha, he committed his crime and apologized to Joy Boy, and even Emmett said sorry to Joy Boy after he came back to life on Egghead Island. And the conventional wisdom says that it's something more along the lines of, I'm sorry, Joy Boy, I failed you. I didn't stop the world government. Now they're doing bad things. But look, maybe something genuinely terrible happened. Maybe it's not their failure to prevent the world government or any of like that, but this failure was their own personal fault because they did something bad. When I think of the antithesis to liberty, I can't help but think of restrictions and pledges from Hunter x Hunter. I actually think that you could be onto something here. If you're not familiar, a huge part of the ever-complicating system of Nen in Hunter x Hunter is the concept of taking on Nen vows and placing Nen restrictions, essentially making Nen contracts with yourself in order to access higher power, but at a cost. A great example of modern Hunter x Hunter is a guy named Hulkenberg. The TLDR is that he can fire an unblockable arrow that pierces through anything. However, in order to generate such a powerful ability, Hulkenberg has a restriction set on it, which is that if he misses his target, he dies. Quite the harsh rule there, and I do think that something along the lines of Nen does help to potentially explain Imu's philosophy in One Piece, because what he's saying, I get it can be a bit confusing. The whole idea of restriction and dominion leading to power, especially if those restrictions are being placed on yourself and you don't have dominion, you're being dominated. In Hunter x Hunter, it's about creating a system of balance, the concept that you can only achieve supreme power by paying a supreme cost. And likewise, if you decide that you want to pay very little, then you'll only achieve very little. And that may be how the Maki system works in One Piece. The Holy Knights and the Elder Stars, for example, they achieve much greater power by entering deeper and deeper covenants with Imu. Contracts that put them in these titled positions of effectively ruling the planet, and in theory, having grand authority. However, these covenants also restrict and bind them more than anyone else in the world. Although I do think that One Piece takes a more optimistic view on this than Hunter x Hunter does, because we also have the Haki system to stand in opposition to the Maki, although Haki is the much more difficult path. And I should say that does also exist in Hunter x Hunter. The alternative to making Nen vows is to slowly train and meditate until decades later, you achieve the raw output that you were seeking, but most characters are not quite that patient, and so they take the quick and dirty path to power that they crave. And that definitely feels a lot like our known Maki users at the moment. Australian ex-theatre man, does Luffy feeling that he needs to eat a certain amount to be able to win against Imu make it canon that Luffy's power scales his enemies in terms of food quantity? I think so. I think that Luffy can see his enemies, size them up, and know roughly how much to eat in order to beat them. But the Luffy food power idea has been speculated on all the way since the beginning of One Piece. He often has this kind of, I guess we'll call it a Popeye effect of, eating the spinach and then powering up appropriately, except that for Luffy, it's a meat power-up. And we do know that eating restores Luffy's stamina, but do we take that one step further? And can Luffy actually grow in power in direct correlation to how much he eats? Not just a top up, but go further, a step beyond. Because if so, then we are about to see the most powerful incarnation of Luffy to have ever existed, because we are on an island of giants. And Luffy isn't just consuming a regular-sized human banquet at the moment, nah. He is eating the amount of food that would be required to power a Luffy 100 times his size. Which may come into play if Luffy needs to become a giant to take on Imu. Maybe that food is what powers the giant form. And Luffy probably will need to do that, because right now Imu's gone and become a giant. But we do need to ask the question of just how much logical sense this makes, and then we need to swiftly answer that question by saying that it does not matter. Luffy is at the point where he can manifest just about anything that he believes, so if Luffy himself believes that food will make him stronger, then I dare say it probably will. It's like the theory of how Nami is able to bypass Luffy's devil fruit and hurt him without using Haki, because Luffy believes that Nami is terrifying and he believes that she can hurt him. All of which is to say that I'm getting pretty damn excited seeing the glorious pile of food that's still left there for Luffy to eat, because it feels like that time when he had all of those shadows inserted into him on Thriller Bark that turned him into Nightmare Luffy very briefly. With all of this food, we may see a more powerful form than ever before for Luffy, even if time runs out quickly as he rapidly burns through those calories. So as per your explanation, does this mean that Blackbeard might easily get possessed by Imu because of his character and want of power? That's a good question. I don't think that Blackbeard could or would be possessed by Imu, because we're probably looking at this concept on a much grander scale than simply Imu. If Blackbeard is set up to be the antithesis of Luffy, then the Imu philosophy does probably work quite well for him: corruption, covenant, and power. But that doesn't mean that he would fall victim to Imu or that a covenant needs to be formed with Imu. Because this goes back to the question that I was asking in the last video, which is, how did Imu achieve this current state of dominion? I highly doubt that he was just born into this position of godhood. So Imu himself, he's probably had to sit through the god exam and do the dominion maths. So who and what did Imu make his covenant with, and is there still a higher power out there that we have not seen? Or even multiple higher powers, like how there are multiple gods of the One Piece world, the Harley text it mentions 4 of them, but we also know that there is a god of war, and Brooke has previously mentioned a god of music. So what I'm trying to say is that yes, Blackbeard, he seems to be sailing through the Marquis Strait, and it would be thematically appropriate for him to tap into this system, but he doesn't necessarily need Emu or Emu's benefactor in order to do that. Although after Emu does depart from this world, that may leave a place open that Blackbeard could casually slot himself into to make a covenant with whatever being gave Emu his power. And when it comes to this discussion, let's not forget a certain Gold Roger, because Emu's identification of corruption, covenant, and power does seem eerily similar to the opening words of the whole series, with Roger having attained the iconic wealth, fame, and power. So Mr. Internet Man, does this chapter further fuel the idea that there are some memory shenanigans between Emu and Imunko, as Emu should already know Nidhogg is here from his time as Imunko? Yeah, one of the reasons why this chapter is a bit puzzling is because Emu continues to act like a completely different character. And when Loki enters the Nidhogg form in this chapter, he does seem surprised. He's like, oh, Nidhogg, as if he didn't expect this, which is a bit strange given that he came pretty much face to colossal face with the Nidhogg in chapter 1177. And also back then, Emu showed no emotion whilst doing it. In fact, the look on Imunko's face was one ranging from complete neutrality to, I don't know, mildly bothered, but not really. However, when Emu sees Nidhogg in this chapter with his own eyes, he is both shocked and happy, which is a fairly standard Emu trend that's evolving. In the silhouette form, or when the silhouette is commanding the bodies of others, Emu is like this otherworldly demonic presence completely removed from humanity, but in his revealed form, he feels distinctly human. So I don't know if this is a stupid idea, but we were just talking about what covenant Emu may have had to form to achieve his current power. And it could be the case that Emu is not just one being, that he, like his victims, could be influenced by something greater that now resides within him or has some form of control over him. And it may be that power that was speaking to Luffy and Loki in chapter 1177, where Emu almost clinically stated that Nika and Nidhogg can obey or die. This battle will divide the world. That could be a big clue, come to think of it. The Emu that we see now, he's ranting about Joy Boy with his little mouth. But the previous Emu, the Imunko, was talking about Nika. So it's as if these two Emus have different experiences with two different characters who have used this power. So I'm going to be keeping my eye out because the real test will be when Nerona Emu encounters Luffy in Gear 5th for the first time. I'm very, very eager to see whether or not Nerona Emu identifies Luffy as Joy Boy or Nika. Because if he says Joy Boy, then we could be onto something here, and our Emu may not just be Emu, but he himself could be possessed by, let's say, the Sea God or the forest god that he may have made a covenant with in order to attain his power. Crazy idea, but what if Emu and the Celestial Dragons were the original inhabitants of the One Piece world, and all of the other peoples are colonizers from the moon who invaded and dominated the natives of the planet? This is not a crazy idea. In fact, this has been a concern ever since the Skypiea flashback long ago. Because historically, Skypiea, it is nowhere near as benevolent of a society as it was when it was led by Gonfall. When Shandora was shot up into the sky by the Knock-Up Stream 400 years ago, the then god of Skypiea immediately declared war in order to seize their resources. And fun fact, this god's name was Ubao, which means steal in Japanese. Steal as in theft, not as in the metal. And I don't think this gets anywhere near the attention that it probably should, but Ubao also had the exact attitude of a world noble. When he saw the Verth appear before him, Ubao stated, "It's a blessing granted to us by heaven. It's the birth of a sacred land. That is where I, Ubao, must live." What's that? You say there are people there already? Well, drag them out, because I am God. And that is pure world noble brain thinking happening right there. And it's coming from the leader of a faction that are really supposed to be our allies. But as most of you already know, the Skypians, the Birkins, and the Shandians, they all came from one of the moons to the planet Blue Star because they had exhausted their resources on said moon. And I think the tendency is to view them with sympathy as like cosmic refugees, and yeah, that could be true for some of them, but they also could have had the mindset of Ubao to go out there, to conquer and claim resources because they believed in their divine right as gods. Or even a mix of the two attitudes. Let's say at the Skypians, they wanted to conquer for divine rights and things, and the Shandians, they just wanted to live in peace and harmony. I don't know, but it is very possible that the alien races that we know and love today may have originally had malicious intentions. Media literacy in 2026. 2 shadows in a fleeting moment equals friendship confirmed. So this is referring to that one panel of Joy Boy and Emu. And yeah, let's talk about media literacy. Let's learn how to read manga together. Because this panel, it tells us quite a lot. And it's not just the fact that there's 2 shadows with one of them smiling that tells me that this is a pleasant exchange. It's actually the lines above the background shadow and the ones next to the foreground shadow. And I don't know if there's a name for this kind of warped hashtag effect, but this is very, very common to see in manga, and it is used to express fun, pleasant conversation. So does that mean friendship confirmed? No, but it's what the author wants us to take away from this moment. That these 2 characters were once on good terms, and those good terms, they ended poorly. Now, to be fair, I have also seen some comments suggesting that the penis-y silhouette in the background might not be Emu, but may actually be Nefertari Lily in a cloak, and that Emu is just watching from the background somewhere, which I guess is possible. But it does match the Emu silhouette perfectly, minus the crown. And also the context becomes much clearer when you examine what Joy Boy is saying. He says "Sodaro," meaning "isn't that right?" And on the very next page, Emu mocks Joy Boy's language by saying "Sodaro, Joy Boy," implying that this was a past conversation between the 2 of them, and Emu's doing a bit of a callback. So the Occam's razor here is that this is Emu and Joy Boy, and they're pleasantly speaking to one another as friends often do. But this deeper connection is also implied by just how betrayed Emu seems to feel about whatever Joy Boy did. So I would say that that's media literacy in 2026. You don't just look at the panel and dismiss everything about it. What you need to do, right, is you need to understand it and also put it into context with everything that's happening around it. Don't just look at it in isolation. It's not just this one panel that drove me to the friendship conclusion. Although again, friendship, it could be wrong, but it feels like what Oda wants us to think right now at the very least. And just on the Sodaro point, Joy Boy and Emu are not the only ones to use that phrase in this chapter. At the very beginning of the chapter, King Harold's last words are Sodaro, again meaning "isn't that right?" So what we've got here is King Harold unintentionally using the language of Joy Boy, the language that Emu seems to despise because of reasons, showing us that at the very end, Harold was free of Emu's influence and he was acting like that nasty, nasty Joy Boy. Look at chapter 1172's cover story. You will see Swan with straw hat and Swan with crown talking, which foreshadows Joy Boy and Emu being friends. This cover was something that I highlighted at the time, but it is definitely worth going back on because we have Swans raiding Bon Clay's makeup, with one of them cosplaying Bon Clay himself, but also one with the straw hat and one with what appears to be Emu's crown, although I will say that it could just be one of Oda's generic crowns. But these 2 swans, they appear to be getting along quite well. And if Emu and Joy Boy did turn out to be friends, then I think that this is pretty solid foreshadowing. But who cares what I think? Now I want you to let me know what you think about everything I just said in the comments below.